Welcome to Chalten and the gateway to the beautiful Fitzroy Mountain. What's up, everybody? We are standing on the side of the road to Chalten, this beautiful mountain range. We're still in Patagonia, but we are on the Argentinian side. As we were driving up to this, I noticed that the road started to turn straight and start to slope down directly into the center of this mountains, making a beautiful composition. I could tell that I really wanted the shot, so we decided to pull over, but I could tell that this time with this particular road shot, it's not going to be a side of the road shot, it's going to be a dead center, standing in the middle of the highway kind of shot. If you guys remember from photographing the world #1 in New Zealand on the road to Mount Cook, I was safely standing on the right side of the road, shooting telephoto into the mountain so I was safe from oncoming traffic. In this situation, I have to run right into the middle of the highway, put the camera low to the ground, get the shots that I need, and then evacuate the road as soon as a car is coming. So that means 1, no blending, and 2, I have to be really, really careful. So if you're going to attempt this shot, make sure that you have somebody looking behind you, because looking down this long path of the road into the mountain, I can see a car coming from literally a mile or 2 away, but behind me there's a slope of a hill. And that hill, as soon as that car comes over the hill, I really only have a few seconds before I need to get off the road. Thankfully, I'm far enough down the hill that the cars that have come, that Lee and Patrick haven't notified me of, have kind of honked and slowed down, and I think they yelled at me with some Spanish bad words, but I'm not really sure about that. Either way, it's a situation where I have to be very careful, and I advise you guys to be careful as well. When I first arrived at this location, I didn't have my tripod set up. What I did is I walked the entirety of this road, or at least this section of road, from the top of the road where it starts to slope down all the way to where you see me standing right now. The first thing that I wanted to try was to go all the way back and try to use the road as a long leading line, but I felt like I was missing a foreground subject. So I kind of walked around a little bit and I found this really bright yellow line in the street. In fact, it's the only piece of bright yellow painted center line in this entire length of road. When I was scouting, initially, I thought that I was going to do a shot in landscape mode, but when I was looking at it, I really didn't like having too much of the road, a wide road and the mountain chain. So when I turned the camera into vertical format, again, utilizing this 3x4, this fatter frame than a normal full frame camera, it actually looked really nice. Then I decided that I really wanted to focus on the mountains, so I decided to zoom the camera in all the way. On the GFX 50S with the 32-64, that's somewhere between 52, 53 millimeter. So here's basically what I decided to do. Instead of standing up high, I also decided to squat down as low as possible on the road. That way, the road isn't stretched out, it's actually compressed. So as I lift the camera up, it stretches the road out and the mountains. As I get closer and closer and closer to the road, it actually compresses that road down, sort of foreshortens it a little bit and makes the mountains and the sky more of the main attention. The other thing I did was focus right on that yellow line. So I'm using that yellow line and part of that white line, 1, as a leading line and a natural element on the road, and 2, sort of as a center point, because the other difficult thing about this shot was finding the exact center. So I was really careful. Each time I ran into the road, I had to take my time and kind of line up the camera. Once I had it set up and a car came and I ran off the road, once I got back there, it didn't take me long the second or the third time to find the shot. So the light's starting to get really good. Actually, the light's starting to get really, really good. So what I'm going to do is go ahead and put this back on the tripod here. And you can see with the tripod, what I've done is I've ratcheted these legs 1 more notch down so I can get even closer to the ground. What I've also done here is I've centered the front of my camera with the front leg of the tripod. That way I can put this front leg down and I know it's almost at least close to true center. And the other thing that I'm going to do just to make it easy on myself is I'm going to tilt up the LCD and check. What do they always say? Look left, right, and then left again. I'm just going to look both ways a bunch of times to make sure. And I'm going to run out in the road and try not to die while I get this really cool shot. I'm going to find the center here, and I have the camera zoomed in all the way, so I'm just going to physically back up here, and here comes a car. Okay, let's try that again. So I'm physically moving myself I'm trying to find the exact center, trying to get the edge of this yellow line. I know it continues, but the nice part of it's right there. I want it right on the bottom of the frame. I'm going to center this up just like this. Make little adjustments, make sure it's dead center. First thing I'm going to do here, focus on the background and shoot these brackets. I'm going to move the focus square down, shoot once again. So this shot is really cool. It has everything that a great composition needs. It has leading lines in the foreground, leading lines on the side, the road leading into the mountains that are beautiful, and the sky is lighting up. Great sky. Now the issue is it's backlit, so we have to do the exposure bracketing, which is not going to be that big of a deal to balance the light. Now thankfully, since there's so much light in the sky, we're actually getting bounce light. So ambient light from the sky is still hitting the foreground. So we're not getting any harsh shadows or harsh light, but we do have enough illumination on this road to still have enough ambient light to make it feel like it's a completely lit and illuminated shot. Another option would be come here in the morning. So if the sun is setting right behind these mountains, if you came out here first thing in the morning, the sun would be rising behind you. Well, that would look great because the tips of the mountains, if they're visible, they'd light up. You might get a really nice sky. But the issue is, as soon as that sun breaks the horizon, it's going to cast light on you, and you're going to start to put long shadows in your own shot. So a lot of times in situations like this, when you have a large leading line object like a road, it's actually good to rely on the luminosity of the sky creating bounce light on the foreground, rather than having the reverse light casting shadows into your foreground. By far the most difficult aspect of this shot is I'm shooting zoomed in close to my foreground subject, which means that I need 7 to 9 steps of focus bracketing in order to capture every single level close to the camera in focus. Now obviously that's pretty easy to do in the camera. I can just move the target, focus, and shoot. But in post-processing, it's going to take a little bit of work to put all this together and have a fully sharp image all the way from the foreground to the background. So as you can see, the light falls off really fast here, which is why I had to focus on getting the shot as soon as possible. So this was a little frustrating. It's really difficult to run in and out of the road and maintain my own safety. So it's getting dark out, getting windy, getting cold. It's time to pack it up. I'll see you guys in the post-processing studio, and we'll put all of these pieces back together. Welcome back to the post-processing studio, everybody. Today we're going to work on the image, The Road to El Chalten. And who doesn't love an excuse to stand right in the center of the road and try to shoot landscape photography? So if you guys remember, I shot this at sunset, and of course the mountains were obscured by clouds. On our last day when we were leaving El Chalten, the sky opened up, so I reshot this and we could actually see the mountains. Now one important thing has changed. During the instruction in the on-location portion of this tutorial, I was actually shooting in vertical format. But in the morning when we were leaving, I shot both vertical and horizontal or landscape format. For this tutorial specifically, and everything that we're going to do on screen, I decided to go with the landscape-oriented one instead of the vertical one. So that's the only thing that's really changed. The lesson structure, all the deep object focus stacking, all of that is going to be exactly the same. So let's take a look inside a Lightroom and we'll see what we have for this lesson. So if we go here, starting with this image, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. The sixth one is focused on the foreground. You can actually see the mountains get blurry back there. And this first one right here is focused on the mountains. Tack sharp focus. And if we go to the foreground here, you can see that that's very blurry. So we're going to have to make adjustments, take all of these images, and focus stack them inside of Photoshop. But you can see that by the time I actually got to shooting this, the clouds, of course, start obscuring the mountain again, just like our luck throughout the entire shooting experience in Patagonia. So I actually have something 10 minutes before I was off to the right of the road shooting this windy canyon area. We're going to see this in a future lesson here in this series. So what we're actually going to do is worry about these shots first, put them all together, and then we're going to do a little bit of perspective blending to put that mountain back in and change the composition just a little bit. First thing we're going to do is export the unedited RAW file. Let's review the settings first. I'm going to have the temporary folder selected. We are going to select PSD, ProPhoto RGB 16-bit, and it's going to open in Photoshop when it's done exporting. This will start our build here. Let's go ahead and rename this to Original Raw, and we'll head back to Lightroom. Let's scroll down, disable that annoying sharpening that Lightroom likes to do at the beginning of everything, and let's choose something a little bit more dynamic, a little bit more contrasty, Adobe Landscape. Let's warm this up a little bit, say 6,000. Let's go ahead and round this number to 15, and let's pull the exposure up a whole stop. Let's compensate, pull the highlights down a little bit, -25, and we'll need to do the same thing in the shadows here. See the foreground. I'm really concerned about that area there, the road. Let's say 25. By doing that, we've blown out the sky. Let's use a selective gradient. Select the mountains, part of the road, and the complete sky. Let's go ahead and zero those settings out. Let's pull these highlights way down. Let's see if we can get it to stay right at 50. And yeah, let's do the same thing with the whites, just not as intense. We'll do 25. So -50 in the highlights, -25 in the whites, and we'll just adjust this and make sure that it's applying to the entirety of the mountain, because we don't just have to worry about the clouds here. In this image, we have to worry about the snow. So that's accepting morning light, so white light on a white object can create blown out highlights. So we have to be really careful to address that. So this looks pretty good so far. Let's go ahead and take these settings, right click, develop settings, copy settings, check all, copy, and we'll paste it to every single one of these guys here. Develop settings, paste settings. Next step, we're going to select all of these images, all 6 of these images, and export them with previous. I already exported the first one, so we'll use unique names. Since I have 7 images here, I'm going to do something a little bit different. Rather than just copying and pasting each one into the master comp, let's instead go up to File, Scripts, Load Files into Stack. The nice thing is I can add the open files, and since we're going to focus stack this, we can automatically attempt to align source images, and we can say OK and wait for that to process. Perfect, everything's there and everything's aligned, but it reversed it. So this is the background focus, the original raw background focus and foreground focus. So let's just go ahead and manually change this really quick, because I actually want my focus stacks to start with the background in the background and the foreground as the top layer. So we'll just go ahead and do this manually. And you should see this count backwards. 2705 is the foreground, 2702, 99, 96, 93, and then the original raw. So this should be focus stacked from the background, we can see that here, all the way to the foreground. So as I start to stack these forward, that mountain's going to go more and more out of focus. But as I start to do this here with these layers, you can see that I've focused on this foreground, and as I start to remove those, blurry, blurry, really blurry. So now we have these 6 stages of focus stacking. Let me go ahead and zoom this back out. Now it's pretty straightforward how this focus is just going to roll through it. So there's going to be a strip of focus, strip of focus, strip of focus, and we could mask that pretty easily like we've done in previous lessons. But since it's so straightforward, let's see if Photoshop can solve it for us. So I'm going to select every single one of these layers, and I'm going to go under Edit, Auto Blend Layers. I'm going to tell it to stack images, and we're not going to do anything else. Just leave these unchecked and click OK. On the surface, it looks pretty good. Let's take a look at these masks. So it essentially is correct, but if we take a look at these masks, you can see that while it's mostly correct, it also has some, well, let's just say it, little ugly splotchy things all over the place. So first of all, the original mask of the background. Well, we don't have to put all this together, and I can turn this off as well. So we don't need this mask. So right away, the background is always the background. I can actually just delete this layer mask. Next, let's talk about these layers. I can actually kind of see them as I click them on, just rolling through the image. So mostly we can kind of see, if I zoom in, for example, that it's fairly correct. You can see that this is coming into focus and meeting those surrounding pixels. So pretty good. I can also tell you that if we look at this, it's accurate for the way that it's rolling through the focus, and it's accurately chopping the pixels together. So if this line stops here, the next one meets it there, no matter how weird the mask looks. But I also can say that we don't want any of these soft pixels in this area. So if we look at this area up here, I don't want any of this. And you can see that here on the mountain. Right here, Photoshop has decided that that's actually in focus, which is not correct. So we'll actually have to go into these masks and adjust them. And it's pretty easy. So this is going to be just cleanup. So let's just go ahead and draw here, and we'll just go ahead and knock all of this out of this image. So we don't want any of that in here at all. Now, since the foreground is black, I can use Option Delete to flood with black. Same thing down here. We'll just get rid of that. And we'll just go through these and clean them up as needed. Obviously, we don't want any of this here. We don't want any of this around here. This edge all the way around doesn't really matter because we're going to crop it. But I'm just going to go ahead and get rid of it for now, just so we don't have a lot of overlap. Fill this again, Option Delete. Same thing with the foreground here. I'll just go ahead and select everything down here. Flood with black, and we'll move up, and we'll do the same thing here. We'll go up a little bit. Actually, this one's pretty good. We'll just go ahead and complete it. Take a look at this one. Not bad. Let's zoom in a little bit. This should be pretty easy. Let's just go ahead and lasso this. Perfect. Fill with white. Lasso this. Fill with black. Perfect. Let's take a look at the foreground. Well, that's really strange. A couple little pixels here. Let's go ahead and just grab all this. Fill with black. Zoom in here. Let's lasso this guy here. Flood this with black. And flood this with white. Zoom it out, and we'll take a look at the final result. With all of these finished and focus stacked, let's clean it up a little bit and call this focus stacked. I'm also going to close down all of the individual files just to make Photoshop run a little bit better here. We don't need all of those PSDs open. Perfect. Next step, let's go ahead and remove distracting objects. We'll name this layer OBJ Removal. And right off the bat, pretty easy to tell what we're going to get rid of. We need to get rid of this sign. I mean, it does say, you know, where we're going, but it's kind of weird. It has these three icons on it. If I zoom in more, we can get rid of these road signs back here, and anything else that we find distracting, which is pretty much just the signs of civilization here, even though, obviously, the road is a giant sign of civilization. Let's just go ahead and get rid of a few things first. So always what I like to do first is see if Photoshop can solve the problem for me. And we do have a drifting horizon in the mountains. Not bad. Actually got rid of some of it, but it's not really going to do the trick. If I were to, let's say, go big here and see, you know what? Not bad, but not great. So we're going to have to do this the good old-fashioned and manual way, and that's with the rubber stamp tool. So I'm going to go ahead and make sure that I have a flow of something between 25 to 45%, and I'm going to follow the horizon first. And we're going to start on this side. I'm going to pick a piece of the horizon, and we're going to start with the ground and the horizon itself. I'm going to try to match that up best as possible. We'll increase this to 40% flow because I want to get all that texture in there too, and just start removing this sign, following that horizon line. Now I do have a problem here. My horizon line is sloping down to the left, and you can see we have to meet it up here. So we're only going to take this about halfway. Same thing here on the top. It's all just texture. We'll address the individual texture a little bit later. This sign's pretty far in the background, so I'm not too worried about people noticing. I'm more worried about things like this, like repeating textures. So we'll want to go in and sort of lightly brush color to remove any repeating texture values. That looks pretty good. Let's jump to the other side. And we'll select this portion, and I'm going to start sloping down slightly, just down slightly like this. Perfect. So start sloping down. What I'm going to do here is just start to try to meet this line, just by sloping it down just a little bit here and there. Same thing here. Let's just go ahead and slowly start to raise this, and slowly start to raise this up. Perfect. so it meets right there. Now, horizons are not even. You can see this kind of meanders up and down, so as long as it's close, nobody's going to look for it. Unless you're the guy who installed the sign, then you're probably going to be a little disappointed that the sign's not getting any love in Photoshop, but that's okay. Let's just finish this up pretty quickly. Color, color, texture, color and texture, all pretty straightforward. We just want to make sure we don't get any of the remnant of that sign left behind. And same thing here. We'll just make sure we cut right into that horizon. Perfect. Clean this up. No problem. Okay, now I'm going to get rid of those textures by just painting in some soft tones. So really blending those tones together. Same thing here, grab some of these dark tones, sort of recreate the slope of that mountain, and of course clean up this slight slope here, and clean it up. Get that to slope right back into itself. Perfect. Same thing here, we just need a little bit of texture correction. And it's almost done. This is actually quite tricky, to be honest, for just a sign removal. This is going to be a little bit easier. Texture down here is just texture. Let's follow these rocky patterns. Perfect. Same thing here. Follow the grass line up into the fence line. Perfect. Same thing here. Follow the slope. Grab some of this color, the grass. Follow the slope once again. And then the fence line we'll grab from here so that we can just pick that right up into itself. That looks pretty good. Now let's go ahead and pan over and get rid of these guys here. Continue using the clone stamp, just because it is pretty easy. And it's good practice. Most of the time, I'll use the clone stamp and not the heel brush, just because I prefer it. But when I'm teaching, I like to use a combination of both. We'll just get rid of that, flood that with color and texture. Pretty straightforward. This is way in the background, so nobody's really going to notice. Same thing here. We'll have this green brush. Grab some of the top of it here, into the yellow brush, into whatever that is, into some more of whatever this is, into some more of whatever this is. Really paint by number here, paint by color. Pretty straightforward. Nobody's going to notice. This is just revolving, repeating texture. Same thing here, part of the road, up to the sign. Same thing. I don't know if that's even a sign back there, but we might as well do it right. And we'll zoom out and take a look. For now, I'm just going to leave these edges, and let's go ahead and create a new layer. Shift-Option-Command-E, and we'll call this Blended Result. And from here, I want to go back into Lightroom so we can talk about how we're going to incorporate this file here. Before we move on, just want to let you guys know the next thing we're going to do is some advanced perspective blending. So this is kind of where a lot of photographers draw the line. So if you don't like, let's say, adding a sky to an image, you're probably not going to like the idea of adding mountains to an image or changing the perspective of leading lines or putting different elements in as well. However, it's a really useful tool in photography, especially in these situations. In this specific situation, if we take a look at this road shot again, it looks pretty good, but the mountain one is not in the center of the road, which is not a deal breaker, but most importantly, it's covered by these clouds. So off to the right, about 100 meters to the right, and we're going to see this image again in a future lesson, or a version of this image, you can see that the mountains are fully visible and the clouds look really nice. So what I'm essentially going to do is take a portion of this image and combine it in Photoshop so we can manipulate the mountains themselves, meaning that we can use a version that doesn't have any clouds covering it. And while we're at it, since this is a tutorial, I'm going to show you guys how to create your own custom perspective on things by moving the actual position of the mountains and getting all that to be seamless in the final image. So inside of Lightroom, what we're going to do, we're going to take a look at this. It's very close, and I'm just going to copy these settings again. So develop settings, copy settings, and here, after I say copy, right click, develop settings, paste settings. This looks pretty close. It's going to need some additional adjustment, but let's go ahead and export this with previous. Select all, copy, close, and paste right on top. We're going to call this mountains. Now here's where it starts to get really fun. We'll disable this for a sec, and I'm going to marquee select the area that I want to replace. In this case, simply the mountains until they meet the end of the road. Select the mountains again, create a mask, and you know what? Let's go ahead and feather this maybe around 15 pixels or so. Close enough. I'm also going to unlink this mask. And when I unlink this mask, it's going to allow me to independently move the image from the mask, so I can start to sort of place this where I want. So right now, let's say we just want Fitzroy to be in the center of the road. Well, I can really quickly set that up. But what if we want to make it seem even larger? Well, I can transform it, Command T, and let's say 25%. So 125% larger in the center. Let's go ahead and apply that. Now that the mountain is a little bit larger, let's just go ahead and move that into place. Same thing here, I'm just going to move it down until it aligns perfectly with the background. I know this is a little interesting so far, but bear with me. So we have the background here, and we have the new mountains in position. So if we just looked at this from here, it would be hard to tell that anything was done. But let's go ahead and zoom in a little bit. So if I zoom in, you can see that, well, actually it looks pretty convincing. It's actually surprisingly convincing here. And you can see it's kind of coming into the road here, but if nobody knew any better, we actually wouldn't know that this was blended unless you zoomed right in. So let's adjust it. Now that I've actually moved the mountains, I can also move this mask. So with the mask selected, I can actually move it up a little bit. And you can see that I can move it up just a little bit on the horizon, just like that. So it softens the transition into those mountains. And I'll go ahead and take a look at the left and the right here. And I'll just go ahead and turn this on and off. And you can see that now we're starting to see some issues. So once this is done, the main soft mask, we also have to use the brush. And I'll turn that down a little bit. We'll take the flow down to about 20%, and we can start sort of painting some of this out manually. So heavy lifting was done with that mask, but now I can just start to paint some of that out to make it a little bit more seamless. So also go along the way, turning this on and off. That doesn't look wrong to me. This all looks okay to me here. And here we may actually need to make some final adjustments, let's say around here. So removing some of this, blending it into its sort of natural landscape. Now we have adjusted the perspective, but we haven't done it so much to sort of alert attention. And the more we softenly transition it and make sure there's no rough edges or hard lines of transition, that would be right around here, as long as I feather that into itself, and then soft transition will look pretty nice. So really easy, soft transition into those mountains. Just like that. Perfect. Let's do a little bit more here. And let's take a look at the result. So from here to here, not bad so far. So that's the first stage of the perspective blend. We've adjusted the mountains, put them right dead center of the road, and made them appear much larger. Now for stage 2. I'm going to go ahead and link this. I'm going to duplicate this blended result just for now, and I'm going to zoom out just a little bit. What I'm actually going to do is select the road. I want to enhance the perspective of the road. I'm going to use the hotkey Command J, and that's going to take the result and put it on a fresh layer. Let's use the hotkey Command T for transform, and what I want to do is just kind of shift this up about 15%. So if I look at this number right around here, if you guys are following along, 85% is the target. The next thing I want to do after I make it just about right here, I'm going to hold Option, Command, Shift, and I'm actually going to skew this road out. And I'm going to skew it probably about 15 to 18%. And what I'm trying to do is increase the perspective of this road and sort of foreshorten this leading line into it, almost like I was further down on the road if I put my camera further down. Let's go ahead and apply this. First thing I want to do is take this layer and merge it down. It's Command E. Next thing I'm going to do is take both of these layers and actually take them and move them down. So I'm just going to move that down to create the new bottom of that image that I've created right there. And we'll just nudge it until it's perfectly in place. That looks pretty good. You can see as a side effect, I pulled this mask down too. So what I can actually do is just go ahead and marquee select the top of it right here and flood it with white. When we go back to the image, it's all going to be fully intact. And what I've done here now is I've scaled and moved the mountains, so perspective shifted and blended these mountains. And then what I've done here, which is actually kind of cool, is I've foreshortened the road. So now it looks like we're zooming right into it. So these leading lines have changed, have transformed, so they're more dramatic here close to the camera, and then they move sort of narrowly into the background. So if we take a look at this, we actually went from the blended result, which already is a pretty nice image, but then we made it totally unique by changing the perspective. So welcome to a semi-complex perspective blend. And actually, it wasn't that difficult, and it's fairly seamless, though we need to do a few things. One thing I want to address is the mountains. It's definitely fun to move mountains. But I do want to address that there is a little bit of lighting on the bottom of this image because it's the first of the light. So what I'm actually going to do is compensate by creating a curves adjustment layer. We're going to link it to the mountain layer by option clicking here, and I'm just going to clamp that result, and we're going to watch the bottom of the mountain. So I'm going to clamp that a little bit, add just a tiny bit of gamma, just like that. And I only want this to be applied to the bottom, so these hills. So with the gradient tool selected, from white to black, I'll actually go from here to about here. And that actually looks pretty good. Let's draw it one more time from here to here. That looks good, actually. It's exactly what I wanted to do. So now we have some highlights sort of moving up those mountains. One more little adjustment here. That looks pretty good. And inside of the curves themselves, we can just start to adjust that light. So just give it a little bit of a gamma boost just to bring that light through on the base of the mountains. Nothing too serious. And from here, let's go ahead and create a new layer of everything. Shift Option Command E. We're going to call this Adobe Camera Raw Filter, ACRF. It's time to unify all of this together. I'll go ahead and save it in the background while we're doing that. So Filter, Camera Raw Filter. First adjustment, let's go ahead and bump the exposure up a quarter stop. This feels a little underexposed. Let's pull those highlights down and protect them, especially in the mountains. So let's go down about a half a stop. Let's draw our first gradient on the road itself. So I'm just going to go ahead and make sure the road is selected to the base of the mountains. Let's reset that local setting. First thing I'm going to do is warm this way up. So we're going to warm up the foreground, take some of the blue out of the road. Let's bring the exposure up just a little bit more, so another quarter of a stop. And let's also bring the contrast up a bit. So I really want to bump that contrast. Let's give that another 25. To further enhance it, let's actually pull the shadows back. If I pull the shadows back, that's going to increase the contrast, really bump this yellow and white line. And let's not get too aggressive, maybe negative 25. Let's also warm up the mountains. Select it with an ellipse. Right around there, I'm going to go ahead and reset. Actually, it was about the same. Let's do about 20 in the temperature to warm it up. Let's also add some dehaze. Maybe 10 in the dehaze just to give it a little bit more contrast here. Looking good, let's apply the result. Real quick, check the result. Looks good. Actually got rid of a lot of the blue. It was a lot more blue than I thought it was until we did that color correction. But you can see here in the mountains, still really blue as well. So the next thing I want to do is mitigate or remove some of the blue shadows here in the mountains. We'll do that with a hue and saturation layer. We've used this technique before. I'm going to select the blues, and I'm just going to go ahead and select the additional areas of cyan as well. I'm going to pull the lightness down a little bit. If I go up, you can see that it's going to wash everything out. So I want to add a little bit of, not contrast, but it helps a little bit if we do 25. Let's also pull the saturation down about the same until it's just removing those blues. So 25, 25, or negative 25, 25 should do it. Let's go ahead and zero out that mask. And this is going to be interesting because here on the right, if I use a brush, I can actually just paint this area out. So I can just go ahead and paint these blue shadows out. And to be honest, if I overlap a little bit, the sky really doesn't have a lot of blue. This does. The sky's pretty flat toned, which in this case is sort of helping me out. So if I were to overlap here a little bit, it wouldn't be the end of the world. I really just want to make sure that I get the mountains, the tops of the mountains, and the hills here. So back in this area, same thing. I can probably overlap some of the mountain here, along here, no problem, to be able to get that. Now getting around here is going to be a little bit different. So in this area, I can cover some of the bottom of it very easily. You can see I can cover a lot of it. If I press the / key, you can see all those areas, make sure I'm not missing them. So I definitely have to get into these mountains a little bit. Now the problem is, I will sort of, well, need to mask this a little bit more carefully. We'll get rid of this. And if I take a look, if I start to paint over the sky, you can see I'm removing all of the saturation. So I need to get the mountains a little bit, especially this area on the left. What I'm actually going to need to do is zoom in a little bit and either paint very carefully or just take the lasso tool, just like this, and draw areas around the mountains. So just inside, and I'm just freehanding this. It's going to be color, which is less crucial than objects themselves. So if we were trying to add something to the sky, this would need to be a lot tighter and a lot cleaner of a mask. But since I'm just going to be flooding this with a value, I can just go ahead and freehand it for the most part. So let's just go ahead and stay inside the edge, the mountains right around here. That looks pretty good. Terminate that mask. This all looks pretty good to me. We'll just go ahead and soften this transition out a little bit, just like this. And let's go ahead and add these spires up here to this selection, because that sky, you can see, is a little bit pale and soft blue, so I don't want to accidentally remove the blue in the sky. But most of the time we can get away with just painting. But sometimes we have to be a little bit more precise. This is a really fast way to do it. And again, not completely crucial as long as it's close. Perfect. Most importantly, this one right here. A really dramatic ridge line. So we keep inside. And it's always going to look a little darker on the edge, which is fine. So stay right inside. And again, I'm just freehanding this. When you go back and build the lesson yourselves, spend as much time on this as you think you need. It's always good to get practice. Masking practice always helps. The more you do this, the easier and quicker you become, or rather you get at it. So let's go ahead and do that. I'm also going to select, modify, and feather this, just say by 1 pixel, and I'm going to flood this with white, which is going to be Option Delete, and it's just going to remove all of that blue. We'll zoom out a little bit here, backslash, and we'll see what we have and have not included. Let's just go ahead and soften some of these transitions out. Soften some of these transitions. All right, that looks pretty good. Zoom this out. And so we have the mountains here. Let's talk about the road. Really easy to do here. Let's just go ahead and remove all the blue from the road too. I'm just going to paint that, most of the blue out completely. Obliterate the blue tones. We'll just double check that again. Not bad. Just soften that transition between here and here, in the hills. And that looks good. Name this layer Blue Subtract. Let's also bring some more attention from this road. I'm going to do that with a curves layer. Let's bring the curves here. And let me just go ahead and clamp this, make it pretty dramatic. And let's draw a gradient. So it's going to be really bright all the way back, diminishing foreground. That looks pretty good. Let's take a look at that. Not bad. Let's clamp it a little bit more so it's really bright. And let's go ahead and change that so it falls off a little bit quicker. Perfect. So this is going to bring the eye into the bottom of the road there. The other thing too, I feel like I took too much blue out, so at any point you can always go into these settings, and let's say 25 was too much. Let's actually say 20, just so we leave a little bit of those blue colors in the road and the mountains without removing them all the way. So it's nice that this stays that way. We'll call this Bright 10, FG for foreground. And the next thing I'm going to do is add some global contrast. Let's go to the channels, and since we already have our create luminosity masks, let's go ahead and hit play. And we're going to get highlights, shadows, and midtones. I only need the midtones, which is not a problem. So let's go ahead and select those midtones. Go to the layers, create a new folder, and we'll call this midtones. First curves layer, let's create some nice contrast. So I can just go ahead and wiggle this line from here to here to create some nice deep contrast in this image to make all those values sort of pop out a little bit more. Maybe we do a little bit more than that actually, so it's nice and dramatic. Perfect, so we'll call this contrast. Next thing I want to do, let's create a new curves layer, and this is going to be interesting, but I'm going to do a little bit of a red shift. So I'm going to bring the red values up just a little bit in the mountains and the sky. So a small shift just to kind of break up the monotony of that white. With the gradient tool, it's just going to be the tops of the mountains to the horizon. So we're just going to have that red, you can see, just on the tops of the mountains. So I might need to bring that down just a little bit. So we're going to call this red gamma. And we'll go ahead and pack up this layer. One final thing to address are these areas on the boundaries of the image, so we're going to have to crop that here. And I'm just going to pick ratio, original ratio, and we'll just go ahead and clear that really quick. And you can see everything is still there that we had before, and I'm just going to go ahead and crop this in just a little bit. Just like that. We'll go ahead and pull this down a little bit. And we'll hit return. So this has been a really fun lesson to build, but let's go ahead and start from the beginning, straight out of camera, focused on the background. That's what we had. We had this image. Ignore the bottom right here. What we actually did is we adjusted things inside of Lightroom and focus stacked them. We removed those annoying objects in the background there, and then we actually ended up with our blended result. Now from there, we actually changed the perspective, so we did some perspective blending to take the image from here to here, by actually adding the mountains in and changing the perspective of the road. So huge, huge difference from here to here. After that, we just did a little bit of color correction, camera raw filter, then we did some blue subtraction and some overall contrast to the image. We cropped in just to tighten it up and get rid of those areas on the edges of the screen. So straight out of camera, we had this, focus stack, perspective blended, we ended up with this. So it's an extraordinary difference from the beginning to the final image. And that wraps things up for this lesson, The Road to El Chalten. I just want to say one more time that perspective blending is not for everybody, but since this is an advanced landscape photography tutorial, I thought I'd go ahead and show you guys the tools and techniques necessary to do perspective blending. Again, it's completely up to you how far you push your own photography. My job here in the studio especially is to teach you everything you need to know to be able to push the boundaries as far as you want. So with that, next time I see you guys, we'll be back in the field.